So, welcome to this episode of the podcast where we have another guest. We have Mr. Luke Tulloch, all the way from Sweden via Australia and probably some places in between. Welcome, Luke. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Very nice to talk to you, mate.
Pleasure. And today we're continuing our theme of how I built my business. And Luke's got a successful online coaching business, which has enabled him to basically travel around the world and do some nice, cool things. And what we want to delve into with Luke is some of the stuff around that journey, that process, because as we kind of spoke about literally just before we hit record, is that it's not an overnight thing and it's not a plain sailing thing that you had all of this stuff mapped out and you were a social media master right from the beginning. There's stuff we all have to figure out. So we're going to delve all into that sort of stuff. But there are going to be maybe a few people who haven't come across your content or maybe don't quite know who you are yet. And I'm sure they're going to click the link that I'll put in the show notes to go and follow you on Instagram. But for those people, could you give them a little 30-second overview of who you are, what you do, and kind of where you see yourself in this whole like fitness industry space?
Yeah. So I've worked exclusively as an online coach since the end of 2019. And I've been in the industry since 2008, I believe. And I was working in person before then. And so my content is more or less more the sort of intermediate sort of lifter looking to optimize their training a little bit, but without making it a little, too complicated. And so I do podcasts and I do education for online trainers. And then I also just actually coach people. That's sort of the center piece of my business. And so that's me in a nutshell. It is a little bit more, there's a little bit of sort of theory and research and that kind of stuff mixed into what I do, but I try and keep it a little bit more usable and practical for people.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think comes across with your content pretty much from pick a post and you get that sense that, and often in your stories as well, where you're answering questions from your audience, it's kind of like, the detail of what the research says, but you're almost saying, okay, well, what does this practically mean for people in the real world? Because you're not going to set up your training like you're in a science lab. There's actually like, okay, well, what does this actually mean for this? And often like I look at your stuff and it's kind of, well, just, I'm paraphrasing, but lift some heavy stuff, right?
Yeah.
and do it pretty hard and you'll be all right. Don't worry about like all this minutia of all this sort of stuff. And I like that about your approach, is that you're kind of straddling that line between the science stuff and practical application for people. And it's like, I think you do that really, really well. But if we wind like way back when to, I guess, when you were an in-person PT before you'd actually started online, like what was your thought process or your decision process for actually moving online? Like, why did you want to go and do something online as opposed to stay an in-person PT?
Yeah, I think I just had been in the industry for quite a while and was kind of grinding away and thought like, what's the career progression here? For me, something that I noticed very early on, because I started as a trainer when I was 19, was that I came into the gym at 19 years old and I saw guys that were in the gym at, their mid 30s, even mid 40s, and we were kind of doing the exact same thing. They obviously had more experience. They were better coaches than I was at that point, but I was a bit like, oh, is that the career progression here? You just grind out 30 sessions a week, 40 sessions a week till the end of your days.
Yeah.
So I always sort of knew there was another area I wanted to take my business. In between, there's a lot of stuff that sort of happened. I went back to uni. I did exchange to an American university. I came back and worked at a few different gyms in Sydney. And then one of the guys I was working with in Fitness First in Sydney actually opened his own gym, and it was a more sort of boutique style gym. And so we got an opportunity to go there and almost build a sort of PT model from the ground up. And a big part of what I did there was semi-private groups, which meant that I earned more per hour and was more time efficient. And then the rest of my business was kind of like, okay, I have all this time now. I sort of set up this model where I would basically have people pay a monthly fee like you would for an online coach, but then just
Mm.
come in, once or twice a month, so I could go through the program with them. And that was really the start of it. So I guess you could call that a hybrid model.
Mm.
And eventually then I decided, okay, there's an opportunity here to travel before we maybe settle down into the next phase of our lives or something like that. And we decided to start traveling, which meant I shifted all of my in-person clients online and just went, as long as I got enough to cover, an Airbnb and some flights,
Mm.
sweet. And so we did that. And then literally like a month later, the pandemic hit and like we got quote unquote stuck in Sweden. So it wasn't the worst thing in the world, but that's how come I ended up staying here and just continued with the online business. So that's kind of like the story of how the career
Mm.
path went. Yeah.
Sure. And you mentioned podcasting and obviously social media. Like, am I right in thinking that Instagram is like your main social media
Yeah.
channel in terms of how you communicate?
100%.
So when you then went online, obviously your background is personal training, being a coach, a really great coach, and mentoring other coaches as well in the position you're at now. What you weren't was experienced in social media and marketing and stuff like that. So what was your like thought process? Did you have any sort of plan? Like, did you say, okay, well, I'm going to do this, or I'm just going to try that? Like, what was the kind of like approach to social media in those early days?
I resisted it for as long as I could. I
Like,
actually
that's
hated it.
most people's experience.
Yeah, yeah. And then I was like, oh, I'm kind of just shooting myself in the foot here, like, cutting off my nose sort of thing. And I don't know why I decided to do this, but sometime in, I think it was maybe 2016 or 2017, I just decided to start putting a daily video on my Instagram. I don't
Okay.
know why. There was no plan. I literally would do it. I used to I lived at maybe a 20, 30-minute walk away from the gym I was working at. So I used to walk there every morning and walk home after my sessions. And I would literally just film a video on the walk home about whatever was on my mind.
Sure.
I'd post it up. It's shocking, like absolutely shocking content. I mean,
Yeah.
breaks all the rules.
Yeah.
But that's how I started. And I think it was just like generating ideas. It was like, okay, I'm on the platform now. I'm putting out something. There was a few people who, I mean, I think if you came across that content and you didn't know who I was, you'd be like, why am I watching this? I don't want to watch this. But I think probably the people who already knew who I was and I had some authority in the industry at the time were like, okay, I am going to take the time to watch this. And they probably found it reasonably interesting, although it obviously could have been better. So that was how it started, man. And then I think slowly but surely I kind of realized like, oh, this like is not exactly the best way to deliver information. And so it just slowly evolved as I realized, oh, okay, you got to actually package this better.
Yeah. And so we talked obviously about the fact that you do straddle this line between science and practical application. Was that something that you had in your mind from the get go? Like that was like inside, that was like your thing you wanted to do, or is that something that also evolved alongside the creation of content?
I think it evolved because originally what interested me is like I'm a pretty sort of academic intellectual kind of guy.
Mhm.
That's just kind of how I lean. And so originally it was just that I was really interested in all these different mechanisms and how supplements worked and like all of this kind of stuff. And I kind of realized eventually I was giving workshops and sort of doing education upskills at the gyms that I was at for the staff and things like that. And I kind of realized that when I was giving these presentations, most people were not particularly engaged with what I was saying. They
Right.
weren't taking away stuff that they could use. What was happening was they were going, oh yeah, Luke's really smart. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But that was all I got out of it. So it was a really nice little ego boost, and everyone was like, "Yeah, Luke's smart," but no one came away from that going like, "Oh yeah, these are the sort of three takeaways I have," or
Mm.
"I'm going to go hire Luke now because I can see how he would help me." It was more
Yeah.
just like, "He's a smart guy," and I kind of started to cotton on to that, and then I realized, okay, this is not really about me. This is more about me delivering information for somebody. So I need to think about that somebody. And so, of course, in my in-person presentations, you can get the live feedback based on the faces in the
Mm.
room and how they're engaging the questions they're asking. And that really helped me to define a presentation style. And I carry that across into social media. So I started to realize, oh, right, okay. The other thing was as well that I noticed that the engagement I was getting on social media was from other coaches, but
Mhm.
those weren't the people that I was actually training.
Right.
So it was definitely a big revelation for me when I was like, oh shit, this is not just got to be for other coaches. This has got to be for someone who's actually going to pay me for something. Otherwise, you don't really have a business, right? So
Sure.
that was a massive evolution for me, probably between like those original daily videos of 2017 through to maybe 2019 ish.
Mhm.
And I think from there, my content really started to improve a lot. So that was the evolution.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the people listening to kind of really kind of get that you didn't start out with having a specific plan of social media domination. It was an evolution of things, and you were essentially, by doing those in-person presentations and getting the live feedback, you're essentially learning by doing, right? You're just kind of, okay, well, I'll do this, and then I kind of see if that works, and then I'll do that and see if that works, and then you evolve from there. Whereas I think a lot of people really like curtail themselves by overthinking, like, this has got to be the perfect post, so therefore it's got to be like this or like that. And
Mm.
like, I mean, the perfect post probably doesn't even exist anyway. But the point being is that most of the people, like myself included, is we all figured stuff out. Like, if you went and looked at my old Iron Paradise Fitness profile and scrolled down far enough, and I think it's actually on my current profile, I changed the name, but if you scroll down far enough, you'll see some horrendous content. Like, literally just
Yeah.
like stupid, like stock footage with really random quotes on it and all sort of really terrible content. And then often you get that thing in, if you look at the archive on your Instagram, you get the post from 5 years ago or
Yeah.
six
Oh
years
my
ago,
God.
and then there's a
Oh,
story in there that you see you're talking to camera and going, what the hell was I
oh, it's
thinking
bad.
when I was doing that? And I think, like, if you always wait for that, like, I've got to be good at this before I start, or I've got to have this all mapped out before I start, it's just like you're just not going to get anywhere. And I think that that's like a key thing that in a lot of coaches' eyes who will be listening to this is that they see your content at a certain level and they'll think, I have to be at that level before I even start. Whereas it's communicating something and then growing from there, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think you still see like a lot with my content at the moment. I'm trying different ideas and seeing what kind of sticks and what lands for me, and obviously for my audience, but also stuff that I enjoy making and ideas that I like putting out there. Like, you've still got to do those kinds of posts. Like, you're not trying to make every post like a home run. That's not
Mm.
the point, really. It's kind of like each little step is kind of, building a relationship with the audience and also helping to refine how you interact with them. Because I think, you can get a little bit stuck in as well as like finally being like, oh, this thing is working. This thing that I'm doing is working. And then you just try and emulate that again and again and again. And the problem with that is, firstly, there are other things that could work well too.
Sure.
And secondly, you get bored of it. Thirdly, the audience gets bored of it. And fourth, the whole sort of, could we call it, the meta kind of moves on. The type
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
content that I was making 3 years ago that was a big hit kind of doesn't work that well now. I remember probably it was that sort of 2018, 2019 period. That was when people first, or maybe 17, 18, people first started answering questions on their stories. That was
Mhm.
like the big thing at the time. And I remember I would put up those question boxes and I would get literally thousands of questions. Like, I'm not even joking, thousands of questions.
Jeez.
And it's not the same now, even though my audience is like 10 times the size. Just because that sort of meta of how people use social media has evolved
Mm.
from then. So if I had stuck with that throughout, I mean, it wouldn't have really gone anywhere. You have to kind of
Yeah, yeah.
evolve with it too. So it just speaks to the fact that it's always evolving, and you kind of have to try a few bits and pieces, see what works, see what doesn't, evolve over time. That is a mindset that we have to embrace.
Hmm. And like, am I right in thinking I think I saw on your profile in the last week, maybe a bit further back, is that I think you put in your stories that you were trying a little bit more like face to camera
Mm.
videos and reels and stuff like that. Like, so what kind of like prompted that shift? Is that a similar thing that you were just, you know what, just going to try this and see if this lands with my audience in a different way to maybe, like, I think most of the content that I see on your feed has been over the last year or so, I guess, like more carousel based and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So is the push towards face to camera is kind of that, is that you pushing yourself outside of what is natural and comfortable to you and trying something different? Like, what's the thought process behind that?
I feel very comfortable on camera. I feel very comfortable presenting to people and speaking. I think I'm quite good at it. But I noticed that I think the carousels had historically worked really well for me, and it's something that I enjoy doing because it's a bit of a puzzle you have to solve. Of okay, I have this idea, and how do I communicate it from sort of start to finish over? Essentially, you've got eight slides because you're going to have a title, you're going to have a call to action
Mm-hmm.
at the end. And I find that like just an enjoyable sort of challenge. And I think I kind of just got a little bit pigeonholed into that mentally. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that some of the things that had worked well for me previously and something that I still believe in is that people are going to buy from you when they like and trust you. And part of that is actually showing your face and your personality on camera too.
For
And
sure.
so I think it's just about correcting the balance a little bit and mixing some of that stuff back in.
Mm.
So, I think the workflow, I prefer creating carousels. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
just a more enjoyable workflow for me rather than like having to get in front of a camera and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but you got to have a little bit of both, I think, to connect with the audience a bit better. Like I sort of think of it this way: a lot of marketing that you read is kind of, I feel like it's based on bigger brands,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and okay, you don't need to have a single character who represents Nike or Coca-Cola or whatever, of course. But for smaller brands, I mean, people are going to buy from you because they have a connection with you and because they like you or they just like your vibe.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 10 million trainers that do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think I'm better than a lot of them, but ultimately, if someone just kind of clicks with me from a personality perspective, that's probably why they'll consider me over somebody else. And so you have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and I think it's especially important in the coaching space
Yeah.
because when you're dealing with something like health, fitness, that's very personal to somebody. So when they're going to open up to you about maybe some challenges they've got with their health or some struggles they've got, some stresses they've got to feel like they want to open up to you. And they're not necessarily going to be able to tick those boxes of trusting you, liking you, if you're silent or just they've never seen your face before because all you've got is these beautifully designed carousels. So I think that is a really good thing. Now obviously you mentioned there that you're pretty comfortable on camera and things like that, but I would say that not say you're not, by that but wasn't to say you're not good on camera. It was more like you're a very like calm person, and so you're not the singing, dancing,
Yeah, for
pointing,
sure.
like over extroverted. I'm going to scream this down the camera at you. I'm going to wave kale in your face or whatever it is. Or not shirtless off in a Swedish supermarket or whatever it is people do these days. Um, so like, what was your then approach to saying, well, I want to still be me, but I still want to make these videos engaging and stuff like that. Like, what's been your thought process to bring your personality to those videos?
No, you're right. Absolutely. I think the that's why I wanted to sort of keep the carousel and the more written content probably more of this of the core of what I do, because I think it does kind of suit my communication style better. As you know, when you're on camera, you almost have to over exaggerate every gesture for it to come across nicely, which is not really my personality. But I wanted to kind of maintain, I've collected a lot of information from coaching applications and from people who have actually bought something from me as to why they chose me over another coach. That's actually one of my coaching application questions. And so I can go back through. I've had hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 coaching applications at this point. Of people saying, well, I like that you're calm. I like that you're not jumping around and waving kale in my face, that you're just practical and get on with it and there's no fluff and this kind of thing. So I view it as a strength of mine. Um, it does have to then be balanced with having the right energy on camera as well.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think I can double down on that strength. Something that I think is pretty key is that we all have unique strengths, whether that is some part of our character or how we interact with people, or we have particular skills that we maybe
Mm-hmm.
learned in another industry or something like that. And trying to double down on those is really what helps us to differentiate from other trainers. So if I went and tried to copy what James Smith was doing or any of those, it just wouldn't come across as firstly authentic, and secondly, I wouldn't be able to do it as well as he does.
Yeah.
So I did have to find my own way of doing it, while keeping the thing that probably matches my communication style best is probably the carousel. And I think also, my style of podcast, the way that I do it, just sort of solo and speaking fairly to the point, is a bit of a contrast. Like something that I actually did, a little exercise, is sort of thinking about what my audience hates about my space in the industry,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about what I hate in my space in the industry. So as an example, with a lot of fitness podcasts that try to give you, scientific information and stuff, especially when they have a guest on, there's like, oh, here's the intro music. Here's the intro to the guest. Oh, now we have the guest on. Can you introduce yourself? Even though I've just spent a minute introducing you, and I also have it in the description. Like, it drives me insane. And so it's like 5 minutes before you actually get anything useful out of it. So I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
went, well, I hate that. So I'm just going to do the opposite of that.
yeah, yeah.
And you kind of almost carve a little niche out for yourself that way. Like, I think it's quite a useful thing to think about. So that's what I try to do with it all.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I can't remember, it's maybe 7. I've done 7 interviews like this in the last 7 days, with various different people. Some people outside of the fitness industry, inside the fitness industry, working with Gen Pop coaches, whatever. Right, lots of different areas, but they all kind of have similar themes that pop up in terms of how they've gone about, whether it's content creation or growing their business. Like, one of the things that's cropped up is like this. Like, I was talking to my sister-in-law, who's like a pretty well-known wedding photographer in New York, and she had this thing of non-conformity. So when she sees everybody else doing one thing, she immediately has like the inbuilt kind of drive to do the opposite. I am not going to follow this trend, or like, because everybody else is doing it, I'm just going to try and do it differently. And it's like similar to what you're saying there, is that, okay, right, if everyone's doing this on a podcast, I'm literally going to do the exact opposite and try
Yeah.
and carve out my own little thing in that area. And I think that that goes for podcasting, that goes for trends on social media and stuff like that. Is the minute you spot a trend, is probably gone anyway. Like, the
Yep.
wheels have fallen off the bandwagon by the time you jump on it anyway. So what's the point? And what's the point of blending in with everybody else? Because that's like the actual opposite of what you're trying to do. Is you're
Yeah,
trying to
literally.
stand out. So why copy everybody else? It just doesn't make logical sense, at least to me anyway. So I like the fact that, it's just strange how, well, I guess it's not strange, but it's these common themes between people that are trying or have achieved a level of success, is that they have these kind of inbuilt things. And as you were talking there, like, I'm a heavy metal music fan, and
Yeah.
I know you are too. And
Yes.
what you were saying reminded me of like the quiet thing, and you know reminded me of Mark Morton from Lamb of God. He talked about, I think in the making of one of their albums, the difference between fast songs and slow songs. And he often says, like, if you have an album that is just like all fast songs, it's like good, but it might just be like constant and unrelenting. But then you've put a few slow songs in there, they'll still be heavy or whatever, but or some slow riffs in there. Those are the ones that stand out, because that's different. And that's like what people kind of like then remember a little bit more. And it's the same with what you were saying there, Ish, is that everybody's screaming on social media. So the guy that comes on and talks in a little bit more of a calm fashion and tells it like it is, doesn't get you bogged down in the science and gives you more practical insights, that now stands out because everybody else is doing the screaming and the kale waving. So yeah, I like that about your content, and the fact that you embrace that, which I feel like a lot of coaches don't do, is they try to copy. They don't embrace like who they are naturally, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting that you can stand out by being not like loud and and over the top, but I mean, you're right. It's a little bit about pattern interruption. Like, you can think about it from. I mean, I don't think people need to get too bogged down into brand assets and stuff like that. It's probably much less important than your messaging and this kind of thing. But even if you think about, typically when people want to make like a fitness logo or fitness colors or a name or something, what do you
Mm-hmm.
have? You have biceps, dumbbells, black and red, it's so played out.
Yeah.
Why would you do the exact same thing? I remember doing a little marketing course with this one dude once, and he was just like, your brand assets should be like, they shouldn't make any sense connected to what you do. You know, people try and always make like a connection of,
Yeah.
that can be clever and it can be cute and stuff. But he's like, yeah, you know, like I'm a marketer, but my logo or whatever is just a zebra. You know, it's a zebra with purple stripes on it, and it's just because that's memorable. It breaks the pattern of every
Sure.
marketer has a different, you know. So I think there's something to that for sure.
Yeah. Mine's a goose with a
Yeah,
fighter
exactly,
pilot
exactly.
helmet on.
Yeah,
That doesn't make
yeah.
any
There you go.
sense.
Yeah.
Even when I say it out loud, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Um, but there we go. There was a method to the madness at one point. But I think you're right. It's like, and I think a lot of it comes from probably like two different things. Is one is that often people get advice from on marketing from people who just did one thing and they kind of got not necessarily lucky, but the timing was
Mm.
right and they did well. But they might not know how to approach different situations and different circumstances that aren't a carbon copy of their own, and that can kind of like lead to that kind of more generic thinking, or they just go down a cheap route and they get something off Fiverr, which is just a very generic kind of like branding or logoing or whatever, um, which has many different issues and potholes and things. So we talked about social media content. What I want to kind of expand into is like what's been like the challenges for you across that period of time where you've made that leap from being all in on in-person PT to moving online, like in terms of the skills that you've had to acquire to keep your business growing and moving forward. What have been like the most challenging for you to wrap your head around and start to actually kind of understand and make work for you?
Well, I think the most challenging thing, probably for most coaches, is really being able to understand their target audience. And the reason for that is because we have this curse of knowledge, which is that you can't unlearn or unknow what you already know. And so, especially if you're trying to market to someone who's, say, a beginner in fitness, to try and put yourself in their shoes and empathize with them is possible, but it's not possible to get their exact feelings and viewpoints and to understand how to message accordingly. So, I think that's been a challenge for me, is just understanding from a marketing perspective that it's not, although as much as I would like it to be, there's not really a formula that works so much. It's more like I find marketing is kind of 50-50 intuition and science, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as you mentioned, you sort of alluded to before, there's a lot of like post hoc rationalization happening. Oh, I experienced success doing this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Logically now, oh, this must be why it worked. And therefore, you know, you get a course made based on that, but that's could be completely off base. You don't actually know that for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so that's been a challenge for me, because you really have to try and take yourself out of the picture. Like it was kind of the same problem that I had earlier, where I was like, I was doing presentations and stuff that made me look smart, but my audience was going, fuck, I mean, he's smart, but like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I don't even remember what he said. So it's kind of a similar thing. You always have to try and keep that in mind. So, you know, that's the thing. And then I think also along the way, sometimes you do stuff that seems to work, and then for some reason it seems not to work. And like you said before, it sometimes is just down to circumstances. You know, maybe
Mm.
like your audience at that time, it just happens that many of them don't have the money right now, or it's bad timing for them, or they just needed another couple of months of seeing your content and stuff before they're ready to actually commit to something. And it's quite easy to get discouraged in the short term when you do it like a big launch and you're like, oh, I didn't get as many applications as I did last time, or I didn't get as many clients out
Mm-hmm.
of that as I wanted. So for me, a lot of it has been like not trying to change things too much, but just understand that, like, okay, if I keep in this process of like understanding my audience and trying to message from their perspective, and be consistent with that, then in the longer term you get the payoff for it. And there's no magic method or formula that you can apply, like, that's suddenly going to get you, you know, double your business or anything. It's not like you can take a copywriting course and then suddenly it's like, oh yes, you used this word when you should have used that word, and that was the difference between someone
Yeah, yeah,
buying
yeah,
or not. Like it's deeper than that, right?
for
Um,
sure.
so those have been the challenges for me, I think, over time, and I imagine for people listening to this, is probably something that rings true, because I think
Mm.
everybody, no matter what their level, even if they're making hundreds of millions of dollars, probably struggles with that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that like the marketing thing, like you kind of mentioned there, is I think you just get better at guessing. Is
Yeah, for
the
sure. Yeah.
essentially where you get to is that I think this is going to work well for my launch, or I think this offer is going to be the one, and the way I package this up is going to be right. But you never really know. Same way you
No.
create a piece of content, you think, I reckon this is the best way to communicate this, but you don't know that that's going to land. But I think the more that you do it and the more experience you get, and whether you do take courses or whatever to boost those knowledge and that skill, is you just get better at guessing, and then the payoffs are bigger and the mistakes are fewer. It's still not a guarantee that every launch you have is going to be a wild success, or every post you make is going to be one that brings you dozens and dozens of leads, but you do get a little bit better at guessing. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
the most sexiest message that I give my customers, my audience, but it is the truth, is that I'm not going to teach you how to have the perfect launch every single time, and every launch is going to be six figures, but I'll make you better at guessing.
Yeah, totally.
is is the way
And
it
there
goes.
are principles, like the principles that you do need to know,
For
and
sure.
that helps a lot. But I think you're right that you sort of just refine your intuition, and then I don't know. Sometimes you can't explain why something works. You don't have the words for it, but you just have this feeling in your gut because you've done it that many times, and then yeah, it seems to work.
Yeah, it's like there's a book by Rory Sutherland, who
Mm.
is like a head guy at Ogilvy marketing agency, and in that book he writes like, what actually works in marketing you could never pitch to a client, because he would say something like, I don't know, you take like the meerkats for comparethemarket.com. You couldn't walk into a client and say, you know what, meerkats, we need more meerkats. Or you're going to say, I know what's going to shift this product, hamsters, we need hamsters.
Yeah,
And he's like, you literally can't go in and pitch that. You've got to pitch something that's, oh yeah, okay, we need this copy, and we need this, and we need this layout, and we need this beautiful design. And what he's actually kind of saying is like the most random stuff that you kind of can't, comes along just as a really weird thought, is what works. And you can't often just apply all the formulas and the structures and the what have yous, and it's just going to generate you success. It's just like sometimes it's just weird shit that you
yeah,
never expect that's going to be what works. And probably the same. I mean, I'm not suggesting people go and use hamsters in their content, but
right.
or maybe they should. I don't
Maybe they should.
know.
Who knows?
I use a goose with a jet fighter helmet on, so who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
But there we go. So cool. So we found out a lot about where you've come from, like the skills and all that sort of stuff. In terms of like where you're at now, you've got a thriving online business. You've got a following that's over 70K and stuff like that. Just for people who are watching that and think that you're kind of like at the pinnacle, you've made it.
Mm.
What sort of things from a marketing perspective do you still kind of like either struggle with, or know that you need to kind of like, I need to get work on this, or I'm trying to get better at that? Like, what are the things that you, even at the level you're at, you're still kind of navigating and kind of working on?
Yeah, there's a few things. I don't think anybody really gets super comfortable with how their business is running, or how their marketing works and this kind of stuff. I know a few trainers who have hundreds of thousands of followers and make literally millions of dollars, and they're fucking really frustrated sometimes by how their marketing works. I'm like, mate, you launched a challenge and made $300,000 off it. Like, what are you complaining about? But it still happens. I think just kind of dealing with as always, you kind of have this monkey brain that likes seeing that little red bubble pop up and have thousands of likes. And in the past, I've had posts that have had 6,000 or 7,000 likes and hundreds of comments and stuff. And that's just not the reality for most of my content now. So you do kind of set that bar for yourself and then expect that to continue to happen. And so it's obvious, it's logical that you're not chasing likes, you're not chasing comments and stuff. Surely engagement does help. However, does it lead to paying customers? Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always a struggle. I think it's something that you just, you have to logically talk your monkey brain out of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing, and then also just kind of understanding how, like, you need to. I think I fell into this sort of rigid thing of trying to follow a certain pattern or a certain formula too much and
Mm-hmm.
straying away from stuff that I personally found interesting and engaging as well. So I'm to kind of put this in context, I'm a pretty big fan of Seth Godin's work, although
Yep.
I think he can get a bit self-indulgent often, like he's sort of modern day philosopher or whatever. I mean, when you're worth 50 million, like do whatever you want, but that's fine. Um, but I think he has a lot in there about sort of working on projects that matter to a small group of people, working on something that sort of matters to you, that makes a difference, regardless of the metrics and the outcome
Mhm.
of it. That's something that I've sort of gone a little bit more towards. You've probably seen it a bit more in my content, because sometimes I have an idea that I think is worth sharing, and I know it's not going to get the engagement, the
Mhm.
likes, and the shares that a lot of my content would. But I've put it out there anyway, just because I think it's better to probably post more frequently, and I think the people that do engage with it then are probably more my kind of person. So if I get 100 likes on that, like, I don't really care when, in the past, maybe I'd get 5,000 likes on a post that I kind of know hits all of the buttons and sort of pushes people's emotions a little bit more and all this kind of stuff. So that's something that I kind of struggle with, is just kind of finding that balance between actually posting content that I feel strongly about, that is expressing ideas that I think are actually meaningful, but balancing that with something that's like, this is marketing at the end of the day. I am trying to get more customers. I'm trying to make more money. I wouldn't probably be on social media unless, I
You
was
had a
running a
business.
business.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so that's something that I sort of struggle with a bit, which I imagine a lot of people struggle with too, like that sense of chasing the correct metrics, and making content, that's not just trying to push people's buttons and stuff, is probably a big one for a lot of people, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. And what you're saying there reminds me of it's in a book called Snow Leopard, which isn't about snow leopards, but it's a marketing book. And what they talk about, essentially, the principle behind the snow leopard is like it's different to your regular leopard, and they're very rare. And so you want to be more snow leopard than regular leopard is the thing. And what they talk about there is they use an example of Gary V and Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who's like a philosopher type thinker, smart thinker type guy. And they kind of use the thing as well. Gary V goes after engagement, volume, pat on the back. Everyone loves Gary V. Whereas Nicholas Taleb doesn't really care. He just says, I have this thought that I want to put out into the world. And that's what I want people to engage with and think about, and so on and so forth. So he's not necessarily worried about, oh, did this get X amount of likes? And then they kind of say, well, I who's the real thought leader here? Is it Gary Vee, who's just doing stuff for engagement and pumping his own metrics in the right direction, or is it the person who's just saying, I have a thought and I want to share it? And they kind of have this thing of how to content versus why content. So Gary V's like how to do this, how to do that, and how to, 10x your business, or, perfect morning routine, or whatever it is. And then on the other side, you've got Taleb, who's kind of doing the sort of, well, this is why we should maybe think about this slightly differently. This is why I think this, and this is, and so that why content doesn't get as much engagement because you're forcing people to think, and that's not what people want to do on social media. And you're not spoon feeding them, just like, oh, here, do this. Actually, nah, think about this. Like, this is why I do this, and this is why you might want to think about this slightly differently. But those people who do engage with that why content, they're much more, well, potentially more likely to be more engaged with you as a brand, as a business, and therefore potentially become better clients, because they're the ones who want to think and be stimulated by that different sort of content. So what I often say to some of my clients is have that balance. You might want to create like the how-to stuff to kind of get your name out there and get some attention, but you need to have something different. You need to have unique thought. You need to have something that's going to say, this is what I think about this topic and why I think it. And I'm not just going to give you 3 tips for this, 5 tips for that every single time I post, because that is how I sit in that conformity box of doing that, what everybody else does. So I think like what you're saying there, that content where you kind of probably in your heart of hearts know it's not going to land the same way as something else you could dream up does, but it's still important to share because that's you. That is how your take on whatever fitness or nutrition or mindset topic it is, that's your take on it, which probably isn't going to be shared in the same way by anybody else. And I think that's like crucially important to get that out there. And if you can separate likes from, even from like that content, like that one post might not get leads either. But it's still like important. And what I talked about on maybe another podcast, I've done so many, I can't remember which one, but I kind of say like what I try and do is look at the metrics on a monthly basis. So I don't care about the individual post and how many views and likes. And I just kind of step back every month and say, did my email list grow? Did I generate more leads? And did the revenue grow? If the answer is yes, then I say in my head, the content that I put out that month was good. Yep. Did one post bomb and another one do pretty well? Yeah. But overall, it doesn't really matter about the individual content itself. Everything contributed to me moving forward. Now, could there be some improvements within there? Sure. I'll go back and have a look at what could I improve and what could I tweak, but I'm not sitting there at an individual level going, oh, well, that got 10 likes and that got 100 and that one got 1,000 or whatever. I try and as much as possible step away from that. And maybe it's something that comes with like, I don't know how many posts you've made, but it's probably released like several thousand, right? Over the years. And the more and more content, certainly that I produce, the more kind of I get to, I'm just going to post what I want. I'm not going to overthink this thing. Like, this is what I want to say. I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to try and hack someone's thought processes and stuff like that. I'm just going, this is what I want to say, and I'm just going to say it. Like, I don't really care. Yeah. I mean, I want it to be valuable, but I'm not going to overthink it to the point where, I tie myself up in knots and don't actually post anything.
Yeah, I mean, totally. It's like, actually, this hits on a bit of a broader point that it's a bit weird in the fitness industry, but we don't really view our businesses as a longer term project. Like I always give the analogy to coaches, like when I came into the industry, I was 19, I think. And, at that point you could kind of pretty quickly get yourself up to like 20, 30 sessions a week. And, you take cash so you don't really pay any tax. And, you're having a lot of fun on the weekends and this kind of thing. So, all of a sudden, you're 19 years old and you're making $100,000 and it's pretty much tax-free if you want it to be. And this kind of thing, but maybe you have a mate that also out of high school sort of went to uni and they had to do 4 years of study. And then they got into a role where they're getting paid absolutely fuck all to do a really shit job and work long hours, but they have a career outlook. The same with like a tradesperson who has to go through an apprenticeship and eat shit for a while before they actually build their way up. And so they are going, right, well, I'm a lawyer, maybe I'm a law student, but I want to be a partner one day and I want to make big cash and have this authority, but I'm not expecting to do that until I'm in my 40s or 50s. And as a trainer, sometimes you go, well, if I haven't got an extra 5 or 10 clients within the next 12 weeks, then, it feels really shit kind of thing. And it's like, mate, you've got time. So you can take that longer term view of business as long as you're making those steady improvements. I mean, you can make the analogy, which I really like what you do in a lot of your courses and stuff, of making the analogy for coaches back to like how you coach your clients. Exactly. If someone messes up on one meal or skips one workout, it doesn't matter. And that's what you tell them. The overall trend matters. And so it's the same for our businesses, where we want to have that sort of steady upward slope kind of over a month or year period. And when you start to add those up, you'd be really surprised how far you can get within a couple of years' time. But you've got to take that longer term outlook. Otherwise, you're just way too reactive. It's not good for your mental health, but it's also like not good for what you're actually trying to do in terms of being consistent with your message and your branding and this kind of thing in your business either. So yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of the reasons, I literally messaged back someone who asked me about coaching this morning, and they said to me, they were interested in learning more about email marketing, and could they work with me for 3 months? So I said minimum mentorship is six months, because I can't turn everything around in a very short space of time. Yes, we can make improvements. Yes, we can get things rocking and rolling in the right direction, but you've really just got to come at this this is not a quick fix. This is everything. To learn a skill takes time. To then master that skill and have it get some benefit takes even longer. And to use like the fitness analogy, like you get a client come in and maybe they have a goal of doing, I don't know, being able to squat their own body weight or whatever it might be. You don't start them off by strapping that weight to the barbell and saying, crack on and let's see what happens. You kind of say, right, let's start at the beginning, especially if they're like brand new and don't know how to squat. You go, right, okay, let's get the nuts and bolts ready. And that process takes time. It takes reps. It takes skill acquisition, and you as the coach progressing them to the next thing at the right point. It might be slower than what they want, but you're in control because you know how to actually get that client to that goal. And it's the same with, like you say, with business, is that you got to take that whole approach that you take to a client internally to yourself and say, right, I'm not going to be able to switch on this online business and be earning 10 grand a month or whatever the goal might be. This is going to be a slow process. And if you have that mentality, you're probably on the right track to getting somewhere. I think too many people jump in that, like, it's got to start happening within 30 days or else, it's all a failure and I'm going to start dancing on social media or whatever it is.
Oh, unfortunately, that's what they get marketed, right? So I think you maybe get into that mindset, but it's not how it works.
Cool. So I did have a couple of questions around not necessarily like negativity on social media, but you obviously are someone who gets your content out in front of probably more than the average trainer does, because you've got 70,000 followers. And I know you have a little bugbear about when someone in the comments tags in another trainer and just goes thoughts or something like that.
I hate it. Oh my God.
So, like, how do you deal with the aspects of social media and fitness social media that you dislike? Kind of, how do you kind of like stop yourself from just saying, "Oh, delete the whole damn thing"?
Mate, it's hard. Those things are tough, but I just try and remember that the people who do that are not the people I'm trying to reach and the people I'm trying to influence. Those people are going to come across my content, and that's fine. But ultimately, is it worth my mental health? Because I genuinely do get very annoyed by it. When people say shit online that they wouldn't say to me face to face, when they're like, I've got no problem with someone especially when you're posting sciencey kind of content. If people come on and say like, oh, well, I don't really agree with this part. Are you sure about that part? Where's your citation for this or whatever? That's fine. Just don't be an asshole about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
But unfortunately, a lot of people seem to struggle with that. Like I've literally had death threats because I recommended people eat carbohydrates, and they're like, "Oh, I can take carbs." It's like, mate, what is wrong with you? Like, put this person in a padded cell somewhere. This is ridiculous.
For sure.
But but you just got to remember, those aren't, as your reach grows, you're going to start hitting people that are not your ideal niche. And it's actually, I think it's a bit of a curse. People sometimes look at big accounts and they go, oh, well, if you can reach so many people, like, it must mean amazing business and all this kind of stuff. And I actually think it's past a certain point, it's a massive headache, because you're reaching tons of people who are not your ideal client, who you still kind of have to interact with to some extent. So you just have to remember, like, who am I trying to reach and what is the goal of this post? And often I find that instead of engaging with those people, I just ignore them. Like, if I can tell that someone is in the comments trying to stir something up, or they're not really willing to engage in a discussion, I'm happy to take their comment because it's going to boost my
For sure.
visibility. But I'm not really going to engage with them looking to change their mind or anything, because you're not. And what's the
No.
point? What's the outcome? Like, so you really have to just be outcome focused with it. It's kind of really similar to, are you looking for likes? Are you looking for people to blow smoke up your bum? Or are you looking for leads? Are you looking for to connect with potential clients?
Yeah.
So it's tough because, again, monkey brain, you can tell I get a little bit riled up by it. However, you
Yeah.
do just learn over time, like, you've got an outcome. As long as you can stick to that, then you're golden.
Cool. And the last question to finish up is probably the most asked question that I get. And so I'm just basically asking everybody else to get all different views. Like, how do you come up with ideas for your content? And then how do you turn the idea into something that's, in your mind, presentable on social media? People, I just think, get real bogged down with thinking of something, and then
Mm.
how do I actually turn this into a piece of content? Like, what's your process for doing that?
Well, I have a few different ways of doing it. The first one is, obviously, if you have clients and you've done stuff with them, they're asking questions, you're doing things with them. That's content ideas, because obviously, hopefully, they're ideal clients that are working with you. So if you
Mm-hmm.
can get their problems, the questions they are asking, it's probably going to be relevant to another person who would be a good client for you. So every time you do a check-in or you interact with a client, you should make a habit of afterwards going, is there anything in that could be a content idea? And just write it down. I actually, the other thing as well is just that I write down, anytime I have an idea, I write it down. And sometimes it is pure hot garbage and it never sees the light of day. Sometimes it's a great idea, but I just can't figure out how to package it in a way that's going to work on social media. There's probably 50% of my ideas are like that. Um, so I write everything down and so do that. And then your thoughts are kind of downstream from the content you consume. So I strongly recommend curating the content you consume with that in mind. Uh, you should, like, if there's a sort of area of the industry that you're a specialist in, I think you should be kind of paying attention to what other people are doing there to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see, okay, what are people asking about? What are people Googling? What are they searching on YouTube? What podcasts are coming out on this? What articles are there? So that can give you some ideas, because you can always give your take. You don't have to obviously plagiarize that stuff, but you can have your take on it. Why do you agree? Why do you disagree? How? That's another thing. I think you can get ideas from other media outside of fitness as well, for sure. I've gotten a lot of ideas from reading books and listening to podcasts and stuff that are like completely separate from fitness, because I personally try and pull myself out of the fitness world as much as I can. And then the other thing you can do is literally just sit down and brainstorm. Something that I've really been a fan of just for my own mental health has been like free writing sessions, which is essentially just like brain dumps, like journal. Some people call it a morning page. They sit down and they write or whatever. I think just set a timer for 5 minutes. It's not anything that anybody else is going to read or ever see again, and just put your thoughts onto paper. And often there are little bits and pieces that come out of that. And again, this goes into the list of these are potential content ideas. And then I can go back into that and review them and go, okay, 90% of this is not going to work, but there's a few bits and pieces here that will. And then finally, you have content. Once you've created enough content, you have content already. There's always another take, another way you can word things, another way you can present an idea. My reels that I'm doing at the moment are essentially I can take my carousels that I've made. That's almost a reel script. Like they're often just a little bit
For
too
sure.
long. So I can tweak the wording, I can swap and chop it and change it around, and
Mm.
that becomes a reel. So once you start producing content, don't be afraid to repeat the same idea again. It's a really nice phrase that I picked up from someone somewhere, that you basically need to give the same message 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. So don't be afraid of reusing some of that stuff. And so, there's all these different areas. There's actually quite a lot where you can pull potential content from when you think about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like people get stuck in that mindset of, well, I've said this several times, so everyone else must be bored of it. Well, when you flip that around, is that that person is seeing streams and streams of content, not just on fitness, but on fashion, on news,
Yeah.
celebrity, film, whatever. Like your tiny little post that made this one point, probably maybe they saw it, maybe they paid attention, but you are going to need to repeat those messages continuously. It's like I've said a couple of times in courses, like imagine if Nike said like, just do it once and never
Yeah.
again.
Yeah,
Like
dude.
that wouldn't stick as a phrase
Yeah.
because they said it once. And even though it feels like repetitive to you, sometimes that repetition is needed. And repetition doesn't have to necessarily mean an exact carbon copy of. Like you said, it can be a tweak, it can be a carousel turn reel, a reel turn carousel, or
Mm.
an article with little extracts that you put as those like tweet style posts. There's like loads of different ways you can extract content from one idea. So I think that's a really cool point to end on. So
Yeah.
thanks very much for being part of the show. Where can people find all this glorious content on Instagram? Where should we direct them?
It's at _ Luke Tulloch. And I've tried to get just Luke Tulloch, but there's some bloke who's inactive on his account who won't give it to me. So, what can you do? But
Not
that's
all
where it is.
Luke Tullocks are as cool as you, eh?
No, absolutely not.
There we go. Cool. Appreciate it, mate. Thanks for being part of the show, and thanks for giving all of those cool tips and those insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.